Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Draft, where I speak with journalists and authors about their important work and the stories behind them. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. New York is on an incredible high with the New York Knicks winning its first NBA championship in many, many years. And the energy is electric right now. But we want to talk about whether or not it will translate to voters being excited to head to the polls and vote in some really competitive races for Congress this year. To talk about all this and more, we're bringing back Audrey Kemp, who is COURIER New York's political correspondent, and she is joining us to get into everything going on in New York City. Audrey, so glad to have you back.
Thank you, Susan. It's so great to be here. And as you alluded to, New York right now is the epicenter of a high stakes battle, it seems, for the very soul of the Democratic Party. A fundamental clash between the old guard and a movement of voters who want reinvestment in the public sector, divestment from foreign wars, and yes, as you alluded to, it's game on. Knicks game and Knicks win aside, the spirit, the energy out in the city is just so palpable across the boroughs, across the outskirts of the city, different congressional races. It's really interesting to be here right now.
Yeah, let's start out with the atmosphere that's going on in New York City right now, and we've got a video. Let's play that.
You're Muslim, my bagel's Jewish, my Christian Dior, when it rains, it pours. She like the way I heard. Like a Mary. Billie Jean, Billie.
There's so many great videos out there. You can just spend hours scrolling through it, but it's such a nice break to enjoy some of the joy there, even for those of us who aren't in New York, but you are. So you're the perfect person for us to talk about what it's been like there for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw some of that firsthand in the city, and it was just completely wild. The city was more electric than New Year's Eve. The city just really came together, and the mantra that you showed in that clip has really become like a rallying cry, and I think a show of resistance to the Trump administration and its sowing of division in our community, right? In New York, obviously, a massive population of New Yorkers are immigrants themselves. We live in the most diverse city in the world. And so you really see even folks like regular New Yorkers embracing that, as well as my city council member, Chiose, jumping on the bandwagon of that meme. And it's really become a sign of resistance. And now, hopefully we see that energy going to the polls on Tuesday. That idea that, my mayor is Muslim, my bagels are Jewish, and let's get all of these progressive challengers into office so that we can really flank New York from all sides with resistance.
And you highlighted something that I think has been top of mind, especially for those of us who are covering politics, where you had just this stark contrast between people celebrating the diversity of New York and what makes it great, with Donald Trump crashing the party, and jinxing the Knicks, so they didn't win it in four, and coming to the game and causing people not to be able to get into watch parties, and then he falls asleep there. What are you hearing about the response to Donald Trump, who left New York City, coming back in and trying to get in on this energy?
Yeah. I mean, the contrast with Trump's visit couldn't be sharper. Like when he showed up, he brought delays to the city. He brought traffic, hours-long security lines, entire blocks surrounding Madison Square Garden completely shut down. And I think New Yorkers remember, right? He brought a 40-year legacy of harm to our city, from the Central Park Five to documented housing discrimination against Black New Yorkers. And so while we were, out celebrating. His presence was just a reminder of the division that he has spent decades trying to sow here, and New Yorkers weren't having it, and so he was met with just raucous boos within the stadium, and there were even reports of him falling asleep. So I think it's only natural that New Yorkers blamed the loss on his energy, bringing that energy back to his home city, which frankly didn't really welcome him.
Yeah. And we also saw Markwayne Mullin, the new Department of Homeland Security, went after Mayor Mamdani and was openly saying that they want New York to replace him, and they're going to step up ICE patrols. And I know that you've done so much work on ICE and on immigration. Can you talk with us a little bit about what's going on that front?
Yes. So Mullen essentially called Mamdani anti-police, when in reality, I think his comments are like a fundamental misread of what's actually happening here. Mamdani has increased NYPD funding to the chagrin of the Democratic Socialists of America. He retained Police Commissioner Tisch, and he just extended NYPD shifts for the World Cup, right, which is also in our city, in Jersey. The DSA, his own base, has rebuked him for being too moderate on policing. So Mullen's anti-police framing simply just doesn't hold up to his actual policies. I think what Mullen is trying to do in our city is use it as like a political punching bag. He's the DHS secretary. He has an anti-immigrant agenda, to the point earlier about ICE, and Mamdani has been a consistent defender of immigrant New Yorkers. Immigrants are New Yorkers, as we mentioned earlier. So the mayor's job is to protect all of them. And Mullen's engaging with Mamdani's. He isn't engaging with his actual record. He's just picking a fight, I think, for the cameras.
Mm-hmm. I think we have some footage of Mamdani on MS Now after the Knicks victory, and he's definitely, been a national figure right now. Let's go ahead and play that.
About the energy in the city right now with the World Cup going on, with the Knicks winning the championship. Have you ever felt this way in New York City before? Seen New York City so united before?
It's honestly a beautiful thing. And I think I was reading a piece this morning that really wrote about it quite beautifully, where it said that oftentimes this kind of unity comes in moments of tragedy, and to see it coming now in a moment of joy, it's something that I've never seen before across our city, where the nation's largest city has become what feels like the world's smallest town, where everyone is thinking and hoping and praying for the same thing. And now here we are, and we're just pinching ourselves and asking, is it real?
I feel
So I know you were talking about how there is some tension with his base and, with different visions of governance. But it seems like, as usual, the mayor has his finger on the pulse of where New York City is in terms of the vibe. Talk to us about how he's doing. Last time we talked about him, breaking ground on a new grocery store that would be owned by the city, and how he's been able to get the budget in line and tax billionaires. How are things going over the last month or so?
Yeah, so Mamdani has continued with his different initiatives. Now, his administration plans to embark on the future grocery stores. I think now what we're seeing is him starting to endorse different candidates in the race, which is very exciting, in different congressional districts. He's continuing his agenda. He's continuing to deliver on his promises at different levels. And now we're seeing him start to endorse different candidates. Like I said, in the case of the 10th congressional district, he is endorsing Brad Lander, who is the former New York City comptroller and is going up against incumbent Democrat Dan Goldman. So it's interesting to see Mamdani, of course, continuing, to stay true to the Democratic Socialists of America and other policies, and support other folks from within their ranks. And now, in the lead up to the primaries, he's starting to endorse other candidates there, which is, I think, heartening to see.
So I know that you have been doing a lot of work in covering some of these key primaries that are coming up, and I want to get into all that. But before we do, can we talk about kind of the really weird and interesting dynamics of the Democratic Party in the state of New York for the last couple decades? For those of us who don't live there, I've been watching how for years, like during the Cuomo days, you would have like a block of Democrats in the state assembly that they were Democrats in name only, but they would side with Republicans and they would sideline progressive policy. And that was a logjam that finally began to break. And now you have a very progressive mayor, obviously, and other progressives on the city council. But you still have this tension. You have a very moderate governor with Kathy Hochul, who, yes, did endorse Mamdani, but, obviously they don't see eye to eye on everything. So where do things stand today? Because it really is interesting to see that a lot of progressives seem like they're on the march to transform how the Democratic Party has functioned.
Yeah, I think your latter statement is completely true. I think, in the case of what's been going on in Gaza in the last 3 years, has really fractured the party. And, there's this new flank of progressive Democrats who are outspoken about not accepting AIPAC money, for example. So that's a huge thing for an insurgent portion of the Democratic Party. Is where do you stand on this issue? Where do you stand on funding foreign wars? So that's, I think, one of the main fractures of the Democratic Party. And of course, that is playing out on the debate stage in different congressional races, chief among them, New York 10, as we mentioned earlier. And then whereas in other parts of the city, there might not be as much of a difference of opinion on that issue. So I think that is one of the predominant issues that the Democrats, or the progressive portion of the Democratic Party, really cares about. Another part, of course, is, I think, a reinvestment in the public sector. In the case of Claire Valdez, who's running in the 7th congressional district, she said on the debate stage that she is for public housing. And so, you see this same kind of progressive flank of the Democratic Party doing away with kind of neoliberal policies and privatization and a reinvestment in the public sector. We're seeing healthcare for all. We're also, of course, seeing tax the rich, which I think is a huge other bone of contention with some of the more incumbent established Democrats. And so, yeah, I would say it's a combination of foreign policy as well as public sector versus the private sector that we're really seeing shake up the Democratic Party. And this primary is no exception. I think all of those topics are at the forefront for a lot of candidates.
Yeah, so let's talk about New York's 10th, and that's in Lower Manhattan, right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
And so you've got the incumbent Congressman Dan Goldman, who is definitely more like on the moderate side, it seems like, and Brad Lander, who was actually running in the same primary for mayor against Mamdani, but they formed this really fascinating alliance. And, it was like part of the anybody but Cuomo, contingent. And it was fascinating to watch last year. And they clearly have, a friendship, and Mamdani has endorsed him. But what are the main issues in this race? And where are you expecting this to land next week?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this race, I think, was one of the more entertaining to watch, just as an onlooker, listening to their difference of opinion. Of course, Dan Goldman has passed some really, I think, progressive legislation, especially in the way of protecting our immigrant neighbors. He filed a lawsuit to get into and demand entry into Delaney Hall alongside Representative Jerry Nadler, who's retiring from his seat in the 12th district. And so I want to give credit where it's due there. However, I think these two candidates, Brad Lander, the challenger, and Dan Goldman, the incumbent, differ is on the case of, as we mentioned earlier, Israel and Palestine. Dan Goldman seems to be a little bit more, I guess, loyal to our relationship with Israel. He mentioned on the debate stage that he was proud to attend Israel Day Parade alongside Governor Kathy Hochul and our Attorney General Tish James. Whereas, of course, Mamdani was possibly the first mayor in history to refuse to go to the Israel Day Parade. And Brad Lander kind of joined Mamdani's coalition there to refuse to go. And also, Brad Lander does consider what's happening in Gaza to be a genocide, whereas I think Dan Goldman was a little bit more reticent to answer that question on the debate stage. So I would say that those are kind of the fundamental differences. And also it's their approach to governance. We see Brad Lander, he has a long history of civil disobedience, right? He's been arrested actually several times, most recently September of last year, when he was in an immigration court alongside other elected officials, and they were all arrested for protesting ICE detainments that were happening right in Lower Manhattan in that district. And of course, we saw last week that he was acquitted of those charges just within days. Yeah, there's a story within days of the early voting beginning on June 13th. And so we see that Brad Lander is really leaning into his history of civil disobedience, grassroots civic engagement, and he wants to bring that accountability to the legislative level, or try to leverage that power should he be elected.
What is the polling looking like in this primary?
Polling is looking interesting. I think I'm actually not aware of the latest polling in this specific congressional race, but I would recommend checking out New York Times because they're very much on top of the polling.
Well, I know that you, Courier, partnered with Midas for a debate over in the New York 12th, which that's more the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Is that the area? It's Jerry Nadler's seat. He's stepping down.
Yeah.
And I know that is a wide open primary with so many candidates, and we need you to walk us through all this.
Yeah, so the 12th congressional district encompasses parts of both the Upper East Side and Upper West Side. It's about, I think, 9.6 square miles, that specific district. And yes, Courier Newsroom and Midas Touch collaborated on the final debate amongst 6 of the congressional candidates, which actually encompassed more candidates than any previous debate for these candidates for this specific race. We included both of the women candidates, Nina Schwalbe and Laura Dunn, and we were really glad to hear their input, and I think they were really grateful to have the opportunity to obviously speak their piece and bring forth their platforms. But it was a great night. Of course, we brought our star power with Don Lemon emceeing. We brought also, I was admittedly a little bit starstruck as a journalist with Katie Couric also being in attendance. And then, of course, we brought some more nonprofit independent newsrooms like More Perfect Union and Documented New York, which I found to be really important, right? We brought the younger journalists who are continuing the legacy of Don Lemon and Katie Couric. And we asked them all of the hard-hitting questions. We asked them about ICE, we asked them about immigration, we asked them about foreign policy. And there were a couple of times when, of course, there was some tit for tat on the stage, which was very entertaining to watch. We think Don Lemon, of course, did a stellar job, as you would expect.
And so that's such a fascinating dynamic because, you have Courier and Midas. You're both in the new media, independent media sphere. Obviously, Don Lemon and Katie Couric are legends in mainstream media, but they're both part of this growing independent media landscape. They're both on Substack and YouTube. And so what a fascinating dynamic where you're covering one of the most hotly contested congressional seats in the country, and it's independent media that's leading the way. And I know that a lot of what you're doing at Courier with your reporting is you do social first reporting, and I'm wondering, are you finding that you're reaching a broader audience for this political coverage than we usually see?
Absolutely. I think, just as a reporter prior to me joining Courier, that was what initially drew me in. Was I encountered Courier's social content just organically as a news consumer, as someone on social media. And I had a reverence for, first of all, like their voice, but second of all, the way in which they're able to relay information and, of course, counter misinformation, which is rampant in the age of AI and deep fakes, et cetera. And so now that I'm in the unique position to produce social content, I really do find that it provides me a unique opportunity to reach audiences that I wouldn't otherwise, right? The algorithm picks things up, people engage, people have a conversation in the comments, and hopefully we can turn those passive consumers into, subscribers to our newsletter or followers of our reporting. So it's very interesting. There's this constant tension because obviously these platforms are run by billionaires who have their own interests, and we're subject to the whims of their algorithm or potentially shadow banning, et cetera. But at the same time, we have this immense opportunity to reach the masses with our message. One of the latter stories that I wrote that kind of went pretty viral was covering flock safety cameras in the city of Troy, New York, a small city right outside of Albany, the capital, where they had a mayor that enacted a state of emergency to kind of override her own city council to get rid of these AI-powered security cameras. And that video continues to generate a discussion in the comments. And ultimately, as a reporter, that's what matters at the end of the day is getting information out to people who wouldn't otherwise see it so that they can be as informed as possible.
That's great. So with the New York 12th, you have so many candidates, and I think probably the names that if you don't live in the district would be George Conway, a former Republican with the Lincoln Project formerly, and is now running as a Democrat. His ex-wife is Kellyanne Conway, who was, of course, part of the first Trump administration. And so he's been kind of a media figure for a very long time. And then you have Jack Schlossberg, who, of course, is JFK's grandson and, bears the Kennedy name. And so these are kind of ubiquitous, figures out there, but you have a lot of really talented people running. So can you walk us through kind of where the candidates stand on issues, what the dynamics are, and who's really the front runner? Is there one?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Jack Schlossberg, really young, but talented politician, of course, coming from the Kennedy dynasty. Has some really interesting ideas about, corporate greed and as well as foreign policy. Then you have Michael Lasher, who is an assembly member as well, who seems to be polling quite high. He received, I think, $5 million in funding from Bloomberg. And he's very, pragmatic. And we have Alex Boris, who's also an assembly member. He seems to be getting a lot of organic media attention because of his hard line on regulating AI. And then, of course, we have, like you mentioned, George Conway, who has kind of evolved from like a never Trumper to more of a Democrat who still is very keen to hold our president accountable and use those levers of power should he be elected. And then we have Laura Dunn, who is a lawyer, and then we also have Nina Schwalbe, who is a public health expert. And so we have a really interesting mix of folks in this race, some of whom are, aligned on issues. But I would say that they differ the most on foreign policy. They are pretty aligned on divestment from our war with Iran. They're very aligned on holding Trump accountable. They seem to vary in terms of their controlling or regulating of artificial intelligence, but by and large, it was interesting to see that the dynamic all play out on the stage. Some of them, of course, I think are more left than others, more progressive than others, and then some of them are more about towing the line, meeting people where they are. So it was interesting to see it play out on the debate stage.
One issue that we've seen show up in a lot of the Democratic primaries that we've been covering is a real influx of money from the tech sector, and they're trying to play big in some key races. Is that a dynamic at all in any of these congressional races that you're covering?
Yes. In the case of New York 12, it was really interesting to see because while we had some candidates be very vocal about regulating AI, we saw all of these AI companies flooding millions of dollars into this race. We also saw some of the candidates who claim to want to be, watchdogs on AI receive funding from other AI companies. And, ultimately we heard some candidates talking about repealing Citizens United. Unfortunately, super PACs continue to dominate every race, including the New York 12. And also in the 17th district, where we've been seeing some GOP-backed super PACs, one of which has been masquerading as a progressive PAC. However, an investigation from Popular Information actually found that it was backed by Speaker Mike Johnson and his allies, and they were targeting Kate Conley and their attack ads. So quite nefarious there. And I think in the gubernatorial race, Bruce Blakeman also has a super PAC that emerged to support him. And so, unfortunately, super PACs continue to dominate American politics across the aisle, and the state of New York is no different. However, we are seeing some candidates like Brad Lander being outspoken about his refusal to accept corporate PAC money. But of course, it's unfortunately a rampant phenomenon across the state as it is across the country.
You mentioned the New York 17, and that's the district that Mike Lawler, a Republican, currently represents,
Yes.
right? Okay, and so that's a district that's outside the city. It seems to be more of a purple district and definitely seems to be on Democrats' radar to flip. I know that Donald Trump actually has campaigned for Lawler, which may not help him this year, but I guess who are you to say no to the president? He'll probably be all over the place campaigning for Republicans this fall. But talk to us about the primary on the Democratic side to go up against him, because I know there are a few candidates, right?
Yes, it's quite a crowded race. So as you mentioned, Mike Lawler is an incumbent Republican. It's arguably the most vulnerable GOP seat in the country. So New York 17 is a top tier bellwether for us. His seat is so vulnerable, yes, that President Trump, a sitting president, broke with 50 years of tradition to campaign there in Rockland County. There are a number of Democratic candidates in the race, two of which that I'm personally watching are Effie Phillips Stanley, who's endorsed by Working Families Party. She is a progressive. And the second is Kate Conley, who was the one who unfortunately was targeted by those attack ads. But yes, there are actually several Democrats vying for that seat right now. It's very interesting.
She's a veteran, correct?
Yeah, she is a combat veteran, and she's been definitely campaigning on that, and so it's interesting to see someone who, has served in the military, has served the country, being attacked in that way.
Mm.
But yeah, so the 17th is a very interesting race to watch.
What are some of the other races that you're covering and that we should have our eyes on as we head into next week?
Yeah. So in the case of New York 10, and that, it's an incumbent Dem being challenged by a progressive, the same question is playing out in New York 13, where another DSA organizer and candidate, Daria-Lisa Avila Chevalier, who's backed by our mayor, Zohran Mamdani, is leading incumbent Adriano Espaillat in the one public poll that's available. And meanwhile, in Queens, in New York 6, there's a former Obama-era diplomat named Chuck Park, who is endorsed by a Sunrise Movement, as well as, I believe, Our Revolution, who is challenging a 13-year incumbent, Grace Meng, on no PAC money and no APAC money either. And so those are really interesting. Tuesday is really going to tell us how deep this appetite for a new progressive guard really runs. Right. And so also, earlier this week, we saw Hassan Piker, a Twitch streamer from Los Angeles, come out to Bushwick to support 10 candidates that the DSA is putting forth and what they're calling the DSA slate. According to the DSA, it is the largest slate of socialist candidates running at the same time in American history. And I think that's very interesting. He calls New York the tip of a spear that he hopes is going to be a national movement. But we'll see how it all shakes up on Tuesday. Like I said, the 6th congressional district and 13th congressional district are also certainly places to watch.
Before we go, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about AOC, who, of course, she famously beat an incumbent during the 2018 blue wave, and is now a pretty established member of Congress and has been a really effective Trump critic on his corruption, on the war with Iran. But what do you see for her future? Do you see her running for U.S. Senate? Do you think Chuck Schumer will hang it up? Do you see her running for president? Even in the 28th cycle, she would just get in under the wire with the age requirement. What's next for her?
That's a very interesting question. I think there is a very serious conversation to be had as to whether she might replace Chuck Schumer as Senate leader or possibly do a presidential run. We've been seeing chatter about both of those possibilities. In the case of Chuck Schumer, a 2025 Marist poll found that only 53% of New Yorkers think that the party should replace him as Senate leader. And nationally, his approval is even starker. An Economist YouGov poll put his approval at just 17%. So, I think this kind of speaks to the larger conversation we're having about the evolution of the Democratic Party. And I think, AOC has continued to deliver in her bills and in her advocacy and certainly in her publicity. It'll be interesting to see whether she runs for Chuck Schumer's position or does a presidential run. I think both are in the sphere of possibilities.
Well, Audrey, thank you for being here. Can you tell us the best way that we can find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So, of course, COURIERNY.com is our website. This is the domain in which, we, of course, own everything. However, we are very savvy at social media. And so our Instagram account is Courier News NY, as well as our TikTok account. That's where you can find our infographics and our explainer videos, but I would certainly recommend our website if you have a penchant for, sometimes long form magazine style features. So we do it all. Our work kind of runs the gamut. So certainly check us out on social media as well as our website. And of course, subscribe to our newsletter. It's completely free. That's where I have an opportunity to kind of also shout out other local journalism across the state, stories that I didn't write, but I certainly read and enjoyed. So yeah, that's what I recommend if you want to keep up on our reporting.
Well, great. Audrey will definitely be checking out all your reporting as we see the results coming in next week, and definitely hope to have you back.
Thank you, Susan. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.